You're listening to the STEMxm podcast, highlighting women in the fields of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And now, your host, Mel the Engineer.
Hello, and welcome to episode 21 of the STEMxm podcast. I'm your host, Mel the Engineer, and I've got an exciting guest for you today. Joining us on the show is Dr. Tracy Fanara. She runs the Environmental Health Program at Mote Marine Laboratory, but you may know her better from her stint on the Discovery Channel's Mythbusters The Search. Dr. Fanara, or Dr. Trey, joined the Environmental Health Program at Mote in 2015. Tracy has extensive experience in hydrologic modeling, and she also has expertise in water quality analyses. She has research experience in biology, including study of diatoms as quality indicators, seagrass displacement, and eutrophication from nutrient loading. Tracy has also studied the impact of public outreach by social media, as well as physical and visual learning, as she mentored and was the design engineer for 2 nationally winning EPA Rainworks Challenge teams. At Mote, Tracy manages the Environmental Health Program, investigating the effects of marine and freshwater chemicals on public health. A focus of the program is Mote's Beach Conditions Reporting System, which is an observing system that provides real and near-time data from the Florida Gulf Coast. All right, so quite a bio. Tracy and I did have a rather lengthy chat, so I'll be posting her interview a little differently than I've done in the past. I'm going to split it into 2, so there will be a part 1 and a part 2. We're going to dive right in now to part 1, and I'll be back with you at the end to talk about show notes and to discuss part 2 of the podcast. All right, here we go. Hello, Tracy, and welcome to STEMxm.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure. So I want to start with a few questions about your childhood and growing up. So would you tell us, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Buffalo, New York, the home of Love Canal, which got me involved in, or passionate rather, in the environment.
Okay, well, tell us about that. So for listeners who don't know anything about New York, what is Love Canal, and what was your interest there?
So Love Canal was a hazardous waste site. It was companies illegally dumping waste. The toxins got into the groundwater. The plume moved. People started building woods and playgrounds, and there was an epidemic of birth defects and cancers and disease, and it was just like if you've ever seen Erin Brockovich, it was a similar case, but near Buffalo, New York.
Okay, so you heard about this happening when you were a kid, and so that got your interest going in like protecting the environment?
Yeah, so it happened before I was born, but we learned about it in school, and I was just so amazed at how everything in the world was connected. Everything that we put into the environment, we eventually get back. And that really started my interest in science.
So when you were a child, how did this fascination with the environment and science kind of manifest itself?
Well, I started with my first invention convention because although I love the environment, it stemmed to science, and I also had a love for animals. So I put everything together and entered my first invention convention in kindergarten, and I made an automatic dog feeder. I thought that it would cut on waste of bags needed for food. It would allow me to give freedom to my pet. Granted, I was 5 or 6 years old at the time.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I thought it was really creative. Like I was the first to break through in this field. Little did I know. But that's where it started. And then I kept on going from there. My parents are not engineers, scientists. My mom is a artist, and she did hair and makeup. And then later on in life, she worked as a newspaper editor. And my dad is an entrepreneur. He was more into telecommunications and could barely work a toaster oven. So I definitely did not get my engineering skills from my parents. I didn't have it from when I was little.
Oh,
Um, that kind of was something that they encouraged. They saw that I was good in science and math, and they strongly encouraged me to pursue those things, even though I had interest in art as well. I'm really glad that they pushed me to do those things that were outside of their comfort zone, though.
yeah, absolutely. So, was there anything that happened in like junior high at high school that narrowed your interest anymore? Or talk to us about, you know, when you did get to college and kind of transitioning from high school to college, how did you decide what to study?
I had quite a journey going into college, and that's because I'm one of those people that are loyal. Like I very indecisive, but when I make up my mind about something, I make it happen. And being a vet was one of those things. So I really wanted to be a veterinarian. I took AP bio and chemistry and everything that I would need to prepare myself as a biology major for undergrad. I went to undergrad and I went to a liberal arts college called Hobart William Smith. They have this introduction class for all incoming freshmen, and my class was on plate tectonics. I was so amazed by everything that I learned in that class that I double majored in geology. And when my parents moved to Florida after my freshman year, granted, side note, they wouldn't let me go more than an hour and a half to 2 hours away from Buffalo, and then they moved to Florida.
Oh my gosh.
Um, yeah, and this was before cell phones, so they would call every single day in the winter while I was walking uphill both ways, no joke, in the snow to the field house because I was a lacrosse player. And he would leave voicemails on my answering machine for all my roommates to hear about how wonderful and sunny it is in Florida.
Oh my
My
God.
roommates would get so upset. Yeah. So after my sophomore year, I had in-state tuition and I transferred to the University of Florida. Well, I applied to transfer. They actually didn't let me in. And that's when I realized that I really wanted to go there. It wasn't my grades. My grades were great, and I knew that. It was because I tried to get into the College of Liberal Arts, which is where biology and geology is. And I hadn't taken physics yet, and I wanted to enter as a junior. So I took my transcripts. I went over to the University of Florida, and I went to every single college that sounded like something I would vaguely be interested in. And it was Dr. Paul Chaddick at the University of Florida Environmental Engineering Department that let me in. And I fell in love with it the first semester. I took wastewater microbiology, and my mind was just blown at this whole world that we can hardly see. Yeah, through then I started working for professors, and I just fell more and more in love with what I ended up doing.
Well, tell us more about that. What was it that struck you so strongly in that first semester and this microbiology piece?
Well, it was using things that I had already known, like biology and microbes, but looking at it at a broader, bigger scale, what it can do for humanity as far as cleaning up wastewater. That was my dream. I really wanted to genetically engineer microbes to clean up wastewater. And at the time, I was very familiar with New York City. I was going there a lot, so the Hudson was going to be my, my pilot study, and then I would move on to Lake Erie because everybody knows about Lake Erie's issues. That's the big time. Try to solve Lake Erie. So I went through classes, and I really like to work and to be busy. So I worked in the lab doing ecotoxicology, looking at endocrine disruptors and wastewater microbes to clean up wastewater as well. And when I graduated, I put my application out a ton of places, even before I left the University of Florida. And the first place that gave me a job was about a mile from my parents' house, so it worked out perfect. And it was a civil engineering job. And I took it because I didn't want to wait anymore. I was so ready to work. It was completely different from anything I expected it to be. All my jobs throughout college were in a lab, and project engineering was completely different. So it was very intimidating at first. And I came into land development at the land development boom in Florida. So there was no time for training, and I just had to jump right into it. I had 13 projects by 6 months in, and it really changed how I saw engineering, science, in the world, and where my priorities started to be directed, and that was to stormwater. I saw that everything was related to storm. At some point in the water cycle, one droplet of water will somehow fall from the sky and become stormwater. And everything that we're putting into the environment goes into that stormwater. That stormwater infiltrates or goes into a sewer system, which, goes into our natural lakes and rivers. And another thing that I was just amazed about is seeing how many people didn't know that. How many people thought that stormwater went to a wastewater treatment plant, or they had no clue where it went. And through my experience with consulting, I decided to go back to school because we were doing the exact same thing. Every single project was approached the exact same way. There was no time for creativity or any kind of environmental sustainable design that was different from what had been done in the past. They had strict budgets.
Okay, I want to pause you here and ask you to...
Sorry.
Just
Sorry, I kind of went on a tangent.
No, it's great. I just want to ask you to maybe describe in a little more detail what types of things you were responsible for there at your first, like engineering consulting job. What types of things did you have to do, and where was it that you really saw this lack of creativity, or where there was no space for that?
So the first thing that I started doing, which a lot of project engineers do, is shop drawings. But that quickly moved to water, sewer, and wastewater design of condominium complexes, renovations to hotels, new residential communities, and schools, hospitals, things like that. So I was responsible for designing and modeling all the pipe systems for water, wastewater, and storm, as well as determining the grade and pond area and design for the control structures in a residential community or condominium, whatever the project was. And also doing, water use calculations. And I had one project that was pretty neat. It was unlike the rest. It was a water conservation plan for Miami-Dade County. Another thing that I got to do that was different from that stormwater and water and wastewater was a cross-connection design guideline book for any kind of developer or contractor.
That's awesome. How did you get to do that?
Actually, that was at Malcolm Perney. It was with Michael Demko, and he is a wastewater guy. So he was doing the backflow prevention. I didn't have a real supervisor at the time, so I was kind of anybody could take me onto their project, which was cool. It got me away from doing the same thing that I was doing. I was doing stormwater at Wilson Miller. I went to Malcolm Perney to kind of grow from that and see if there was, at an environmental engineering firm, if there was sustainability that was brought into their designs. And when I got to Malcolm Perney, it turned out that I was only stormwater person. So with 2 years of experience, I was trying to do everything on my own until I paired up with Susie Folsom, who ended up being my supervisor.
Oh, that's awesome.
But yeah, that really didn't answer your question. because you wanted to know at what point did I realize that everything was being done the same way. And I guess that was when I went from one firm to another firm and realized that that's just how things were approached in stormwater design. No one was looking at low impact development, promoting infiltration, treating at the source. It was all get the water to the pipe as fast as possible, because quantity is what regulation was worried about. That's what we had to meet. Were these pond max water heights, or stage is what we call it. And we couldn't cause downstream water body to increase more than 1/10 of a foot, for example. And that's all we were worried about. We were worried about detention times, of course, but not really the chemistry of it. Engineers become engineers because of their, creativity and ingenuity. However, because of regulations in place, clients, budgets, and timelines, a lot of times creativity isn't really allowed for, just because of those things. So we end up doing the same thing over and over again for each project, approaching it the same way, even though it may be a different area, a different concept.
Okay, so some of the stuff where you saw in the design that people are just doing this same thing over and over again, and you can tell that it's not the best thing for the environment. Is this part of what helped you decide you wanted to go back to school for graduate work, or what else influenced that?
Yeah, that's 100% the reason why I went back to graduate school, was because I saw everything being done the same way. And that's because we were meeting minimum regulations, because that's what minimum regulations were. We were doing whatever we were allowed to do, basically. So I wanted to go back to school to kind of prove that there's a better way that's more economically feasible as well, and change the regulations through research. I felt that was the most powerful place that I can be in to kind of make that impact to stormwater design.
So, how did you decide where to go back to school and who to do your research with?
Deciding where to go back to school was kind of easy for me. I had such a great experience in my undergrad with the University of Florida Environmental Engineering program. It was very small at the time. I knew all the professors, and they actually cared about the students. A lot of times, professors, they have so much pressure for research that their teaching kind of goes by the wayside. But not for me, not in my experience. I absolutely loved every professor that I had in undergrad, and they were so inspiring to me that was my first choice.
Okay, so tell us what happened from there. Did you go for a master's, or did you go for a master's and a PhD? And did you have like a research topic in mind, or did you go and look for a professor that had grant money for something?
So I learned a lot of lessons the hard way through grad school. I was accepted in through a stormwater program. Dr. John Sansaloni was the professor, and I wanted to get a PhD right away. I wasn't going to get a master's. So I was a storm chaser. But not the kind of storm chaser you would think of. I didn't go and find tornadoes. I was catching rainstorms. We were diverting the runoff from a parking lot into this new filter media to remove nutrients and metals and other pollutants from stormwater before it would go to a natural water body. And this kind of chemical treatment is really, I think it's really going to be the future. With all the urbanization that's happening, we're going to get to a point where we can't depend on long detention times, and we're going to have to go to these chemical treatment forms. So it was pretty cool because we would have to, watch the radar and find out when the storm was coming. Sometimes we would stay up all night long waiting for a storm and it would never come. I know I started that with saying it's pretty cool, and it was because we were all we were all there for the same purpose. I really felt like I was part of a team. And my research team was absolutely wonderful. Everybody was hardworking, brilliant people. But, sometimes you realize that what you're doing at that point isn't what you want to do for the rest of your life. And it wasn't the storm chasing that I had a problem with. I was encouraged to focus on phosphorus specifically. So there's a lot of lakes in northern Florida that are phosphorus limited, and phosphorus and transport and removal is really important. And it is all over the state, but like the ocean, for example, the Gulf of Mexico, Lake Okeechobee, they're nitrogen limited. And I didn't want to limit myself to just phosphorus. So I took a really big risk because I was funded through that program. And, I knew that the funding was running out. And actually, Dr. David Mazek at the University of Florida saved me one semester because funding ran out on a project, and he actually helped me get a grant for that next year. But I took a really big risk by going out on my own, basically. I knew what I wanted to do from my experience and everything that I did with John Sansaloni. I turned that into a master's degree, and I wanted to go into big picture watershed rehabilitation, basically. I wanted to go into hydrologic restoration of watersheds. So through low impact design and development, I also wanted to have an education and outreach aspect because I knew how important that was. For example, earlier I said, the people that I asked, most of the people, and in fact, during my PhD, I did a survey, and I asked people where they thought their stormwater went. And in the state of Florida, 100% of the stormwater goes to natural water bodies. But 72% of people that I asked either didn't know or thought that it went to a wastewater treatment plant. So I knew that education and outreach had to be part of it. So I went around and asked professors that I thought had the same kind of big picture mentality as me. And I found Dr. Bill Wise, and he didn't have any funding for me. So I knew I was going to be completely on my own there. But I also really felt passionate about what I was trying to do. So I paired up with him. I applied for grants, and I received a fellowship. It was called SPICE. And it allowed scientists to go to middle schools and teach 7th grade science 2 full days a week. It was the hardest job I've ever had.
Yeah, I bet. Okay.
Yeah.
So there was a lot in there that you just said. And I want to go back to a couple things. So 2 things you mentioned that I'd just like to ask you to explain to the audience. You mentioned the phrase detention time. I want you to explain that. And then could you also explain what's meant by phosphorus limited or nitrogen limited?
So by detention time, I mean the amount of time that water has to stay in a specific unit, like a pond or a lake, so that you can have microbial degradation of pollutants. So microbes can break down that nutrients and consume that nutrients from fertilizer and in the runoff. So that's what detention time is. In areas where you have a lot of phosphorus. So there's a combination of phosphorus and nitrogen that really causes eutrophication. Eutrophication is the proliferation of algae or just mass quantities of algae. So if you ever walk by a lake and see a really thick green paste, that's eutrophication. And the problem is that it blocks out sunlight from everything underneath. So photosynthesis can't occur. And, then the fish don't have foods. It goes all the way up the food chain. Not only that, it decreases the amount of dissolved oxygen available for the community that's in that lake. So there's a combination of them. So if you have an area that you have a lot of phosphorus, just a little bit of nitrogen is going to cause that eutrophication or those reactions to happen. So that's what I mean by phosphorus and nitrogen limited. For example, lakes in near Gainesville, Florida, there's more nitrogen available than phosphorus, so it's phosphorus limited. So when there's phosphorus available, that's when that reaction occurs. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yes. Thank you for explaining those things. And then I wanted to go back too for a second to the funding that you were talking about. So for some of our listeners, maybe the younger ones who are, at the beginning of college, or maybe they're not in college yet, it's pretty typical when you go for a master's degree or a PhD to go and find a professor that's doing research that's funded and then work under them, which means that your research is paid for under that grant or wherever the funding is coming from. So when you say that you learned things the hard way, was part of it meaning that you took this risk to go out on your own and, you risked basically not having funding to be able to do the research that you wanted to do?
Right. That was part of it. But learning the hard way was also, you think you're in a situation where you have grant funding and all of a sudden it runs out.
Yep.
And you're kind of up a creek. And so the two things that I tell all my interns is to ask people about professors, to ask students about the professors that they've worked for, their experiences, know what you're getting into, and find the right match. The next thing I say is do everything in your power to get outside funding so that when you walk into grad school, you know that you're being taken care of no matter what happens, and you have more freedom with your research. Because a lot of times when you're being funded by a professor, your topic is kind of picked for you unless you do a whole bunch of extra work on top of what's required of you.
Right. So back what you were describing, your work, if you had just kept on going down that path, it would have been this intensive look at just phosphorus. You're
exactly right.
Yeah. Okay.
Unless I wanted to work, I was already working 60 to 70 hours. If I wanted to work, I don't even know if there's enough hours in the week to be able to do something completely different.
Right.
And then, on top of the phosphorus work.
Right. Thank you so much for joining me for episode 21 of the STEMxm podcast. This is your host, Mel the Engineer, and today we're speaking with Tracy Fanara. Tracy is telling us about some of her early career experience as an engineer, and then later her decision to return to school for a PhD. You can listen to this episode again or share it from iTunes, Stitcher, or directly from the STEMxm website at stemxm.com/episode 21. For now, let's get back to our chat with Tracy.
But I would encourage students to do that as well. Find out what grants are available and how to write them and how best to approach each grant, because the review board they're different for each entity. So you want to be really specific on what you focus on.
Yeah, I've heard of other schools that have resources like that. So definitely check into it wherever you're looking to go to university, or if you're already at university, definitely dig around and see what you can find, because I feel like that's part of the university's responsibility, is having resources for you to help make you successful. So yeah, thank you for explaining that.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So,
and another thing I would really like to mention is that through my PhD, after I got that SPICE fellowship, I worked in a consulting firm. I had already had 3.5 years of consulting and work experience before going into grad school. Other people that just went right from undergrad to master's, PhD, they didn't get that consulting experience. And when they graduated, it ended up hurting them. So I would encourage, even if you're doing complete research, at least do internships at other places so that you have options when you graduate. In addition, I applied for something called the Presidential Management Fellowship. It's a government fellowship that basically just speeds you through the process of being hired. And in addition, within 2 years of your fellowship, you step up an entire step, which usually takes many years to do. It's a great opportunity, but I think that I was given that opportunity because of my work experience in addition to the education.
Yeah, absolutely right. So I won't harp on this too long, but in addition to, being sort of over specialized when you do that, from the business world's perspective, you also haven't really proven yourself yet. If you haven't done any internships or you didn't work between doing an undergrad and graduate work, you haven't really proven your willingness to be dedicated to a regular job and dedicated to doing whatever it takes to get the job done. It's kind of like they've done the opposite. They've proven their ability to focus on one very narrow thing.
You're exactly right. And in addition, many graduate experiences, you're micromanaged and kind of, I don't want to say babied, but you're really managed all the way through. That wasn't the case with my PhD, but when you enter, the consulting world, that's another thing that they consider and they think about is that, you haven't really had that autonomy.
Yep, absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up, and I'll bring it back around now to your path. So let's talk about what you did next. What happened for you after you did earn your PhD?
After earning my PhD, my entire life changed. It was the best thing I ever did. And I say that not because I think that everybody should get a PhD. I say that because it was personally for me the best thing that I could have done for what I wanted to do. And anybody who asked me about getting a PhD, I specifically asked them for what reason. Because it can be really treacherous time. And you don't want to go through it if you don't have to. But for me, upon graduation, I got a job and I got really lucky with it because usually at Moe Marine Laboratory, they hire postdocs. And then if you're lucky enough, you get to be a staff scientist. I came in at the perfect time to manage the environmental health program at Moe Marine Laboratory. I got that position because of the education and outreach aspect of my dissertation. Even though it didn't make it to my final dissertation, I throughout my PhD, I mentored and was a design engineer for 2 EPA Rainworks Challenge teams, which is an integrated project team with different disciplines throughout the college to come together to it was a journey of water, basically, to make an educative, artful stormwater treatment design for the University of Florida. It was a retrofit project. And because we did so well, the University of Florida actually wanted to implement that plan. So we'll see what happens in the future with it. But anyway, that was that education and outreach aspect that I had in there really gave me the edge to get that position with Moe Marine Laboratory.
Okay, so tell us more about Moe Marine. What happens there and where does your role fit in?
Moe Marine Laboratory is an amazing place. It's they focus on marine science. There are, I think, 27 research programs. We were the first to regenerate coral in a lab to grow exponentially what it does out in the natural world, and then actually have it acclimate in the natural world at decreased pHs and different environments, so that coral can withstand a changing environment better than natural coral can, which is pretty amazing. We're also known for our shark research. They've been featured on Shark Week pretty much every year. And then my program has historically focused on red tide, which is the species Karenia brevis. It's a harmful algae, and when there is a proliferation of this algae, it's called a bloom. and it's commonly called a red tide bloom because of its color. The color can be anywhere from green to brown, but a lot of people see it as red, so that's just what we've been calling it all these years, correct or not. But what makes this species so special is that it contains a toxin called brevetoxin. This toxin can actually aerosolize, attach to sea salt particles, and come on shore, causing respiratory irritation in healthy individuals, but it can cause serious problems with those with asthma or COPD or other respiratory problems. So it's really important for us. And this is a naturally occurring phenomena. And it's happening in the Gulf, so we can't stop it. But the best way to protect the public is to alert them of where these blooms are, where the effects are. So my first job at Mote Marine Laboratory was to redevelop the beach conditions reporting system, which was a beach conditions system where beach sentinels from 25 Gulf Coast beaches report beach conditions daily so that the public can check this site, find out what beaches are not experiencing red tide symptoms, and go to those beaches so they have a healthy, happy beach experience. When I came in, I redeveloped the site to be something that people would go to whether there was a red tide bloom or not. We added beaches. Now we have 31 Gulf Coast beaches reporting. And I created an app, a smartphone application for this. But there were still spaces in between these beaches. So me and another scientist got together, or another scientist and I should say, got together and created a citizen science application to really fill in those gaps. And then right now I'm working on a NASA-funded cell phone microscope called HABscope. And that will allow citizens to actually take samples, put it in a microscope, and this microscope, the smartphone has an application with an algorithm that will actually quantify and give you cell concentrations immediately.
What? Tracy, that is crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy because right now, for example, we take samples from 16 beaches throughout Sarasota County on Mondays. They're brought to the lab and someone has to sit on a microscope and actually count those cells.
Oh my gosh.
It takes 1 to 2 days to get those results. This HABscope will give us results in 5 minutes. Those results go up to a NOAA respiratory irritation model so that people get real-time respiratory irritation information.
That's awesome. Okay, so if I look this up, will I find information about it online that I can link to?
Oh, yeah. We've done plenty of press releases on all three things. The BCRS, the citizen science application, we call it CSIC. It's CSIC, get it, CSIC. And then HABscope is the other one. But, and that's me carrying out what the environmental health program has done in the past and just, expanding on that. But my passion is still low impact development, water treatment, and stormwater design. So I have an endocrine disruption project right now, which we're doing modeling for to see how endocrine disruptors affect coral. But what I'm really excited about is an EPA grant that I just turned in with University of Florida professor David Mazek and another professor from University of Central Florida who created a stormwater media. And I have this idea for this new media, and I think it's going to be amazing because I think it's going to not only remove nitrogen and phosphorus, but also toxins from the water. So we had this big microcystin outbreak, which is cyanobacteria. You might have seen in the news that green slime that was in the Indian River Lagoon, Lake Okeechobee, Caloosahatchee.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this water treatment technology, which it would be implemented in LID tools like infiltration trenches or swales or stormwater vaults, for example. And this media would actually remove that toxin from moving downstream and getting into our drinking water system. So, since Lake Erie had this same cyanobacteria problem, the toxin actually got into the drinking water system and shut down drinking water in the city of Cincinnati for like weeks.
Yeah. So
So
these
we
are
don't
real
want
problems.
that to happen here.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So how is Moat Marine primarily funded? Is it mostly through grants?
It's 100% through grants and donations. We're completely soft money.
Okay.
It's a nonprofit organization.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you something and you can tell me that you don't want to answer this and we'll move on.
No, that's fine.
Okay. So you just mentioned that, you got this new grant to work on the microscope, and then you put in an application, you put in a grant application for another project that you hope you'll get to work on with these other researchers. And Moat Marine itself is grant funded and funded with donations. So we're in this really interesting political time right now when I'm talking to you and we're recording this. Do you have any thoughts that you might want to share on how important grants,
of course,
through things like NSF are?
Yeah, so without grants from NSF, EPA, state-funded opportunities, we would all be out of jobs. So the people that have worked so hard to make peanuts to make the world a better place will be out of jobs. I know that's kind of harsh to say, but it's, it's real life. And the way that we can stop that from happening is communicating science in a way that people can understand and in a way that satisfies the motivations of the audience. So you can say the same thing, but focus on something, for example, low impact development. Okay, low impact development will save taxpayers money, save municipalities money by reducing the cost of water treatment technologies. The amount of times filters need to be changed, for example. In development, it will limit the amount of pipes needed or the amount of space needed for a pond. You focus on those kind of things. For red tide, for example, tourism. We want people to come from up north and enjoy the Gulf Coast of Florida. So red tide research, the way that we would communicate that is, we want people from New York that come down to Sarasota to have a healthy and happy beach experience. And if their first experience, they go to a beach and they're coughing and their eyes are itching, they're going to think that that's how Gulf Coast beaches are, and they're never going to come back. Like tools like the BCRS and citizen science, those outreach tools. And in addition, that red tide research will help the public, help the economy, and help tourism. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, that makes sense. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. Even though this is part 1 with Dr. Fanara, we covered quite a bit. To learn about some of the super cool things Tracy talked about, like the Gulf Coast Beach Research and Citizen Science Project, visit the show notes at STEMxm.com/episode 21. That's STEMxm.com/episode and then the number 21. So, in this first part, we didn't even get to the piece where she talks about Mythbusters, so you'll definitely want to check out part 2, which should be out in a couple of weeks. If you are a new listener, I want to let you know that STEMxm is a podcast about careers in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Specifically, we highlight women in these fields. I hope that this can be a resource to students or people looking to change careers, like a place where folks can learn what those careers are all about and what they're like on a daily basis from the people who are actually in them now. A lot of times there are careers out there that we may not know anything about them if we don't have someone in our network that's doing them. So I'm trying to fill that void. Or maybe you're here because you want to hear about successful professional women that are totally rocking it in their field. Either way, I hope you enjoy the show, and I hope you'll consider sharing it with someone you know who might benefit from it. Also, one other quick thing. This episode is part of a series I did on water and wastewater careers. So if you have an interest in those fields, you may want to check out episode 17 on wastewater treatment operations, episode 18 on municipal water master planning, episode 19 on drinking water treatment design, and episode 20 on stormwater and green infrastructure. Thank you again for downloading and joining me today. I really appreciate you. And I'd love to hear from you, so reach out to me on Facebook at facebook.com/STEMxm, or head on over to STEMxm.com and share thoughts and ideas with me about how we can make the podcast better. Okay, we have to stop for now, but join me in episode 22 for part 2 of the conversation with Tracy Fanara. See you then.
This has been an episode of the STEMxm podcast. Thank you for listening. We would really love if you could pop over to iTunes and give us an honest, positive rating. It helps more listeners find us to learn about STEM careers. Thanks again, cheers, and we'll catch you on the next episode.